As I've talked about many times before, English spelling is famously a little confusing. There also isn't really anything that can be done about that. There isn't any organization that exists with the power to completely fundamentally change how spelling works, and because English is spoken in so many different places, it would be impossible to get the global English-speaking community to all collectively agree that such a change is actually necessary. Fortunately, in the modern age, text isn't restricted to the limitations of print. The written word can react in real time to the needs of the reader, which means that you could quote-unquote fix the problems with English spelling without needing to change the way words are spelled. Imagine, if you will, that you're reading some English text and you encounter a word you don't know how to pronounce, so you click on it and the word is instantly respelled phonetically. Then, if you still don't understand the phonetic respelling, you can click on it again and hear how it's pronounced. It's a cool idea, right? It's like, usually what you need to do for that is stop what you're doing and go Google that word and check how to say it. Or if you're me, you copy-paste it into the Wiktionary search bar. But by having it just be a feature of the medium you're using to read the text, it makes that much easier to do. But okay, here's the thing. Sure, clicking a word you don't know how to say and being shown its pronunciation would definitely work, but if this were something that everyone used, it might make it so that more people conceptualize English spelling as something that's just completely arbitrary, and that you're expected to just memorize pronunciation of every single word one at a time. So what if instead of the phonetic notation just showing the pronunciation itself, it also showed why it's pronounced the way it is? Instead of just completely respelling the word, you'd modify the individual letters to show which letters of the spelling make which sounds in the pronunciation. Ideally, such a system would be used as training wheels, something that could aid you in developing better intuitions for how English spelling works, so that in the future your first guess for how to pronounce an unfamiliar word will be better. And again, I want to emphasize that I think this idea has potential. This is something that could, in theory, be done well. So, let's talk about PCUES. PCUES is a phonetic transcription system created by Learning Stewards, a small nonprofit organization that aims to, quote, advance society's understanding of learning and the profound role it plays in all our lives. The system is designed specifically to assist in teaching children how to read. Now, I'm going to be criticizing the design of PCUES throughout this video, so there's a few things I'd like to make clear up front. First of all, please don't go bothering these people, okay? Like, by small organization, I mean they employ like 3 people. They don't need that kind of attention. Knowing my audience, I think I could trust you all to be chill about this, but if any of you go harassing the employees of this nonprofit over problems that YouTuber you like has with the phonetic transcription system they made, I'm the one who's going to get sued for it. Second, I am not an educator. I am but a lowly YouTuber and amateur linguist. Learning Stewards appears to have done some amount of field research using the system to verify that it can actually help children learn how to read. My criticism with this system is from a linguistic perspective more so than from a practical one. And the problem I have is with the design of the phonetic transcription system itself, and not the technology that powers it or the core concept behind it. Great, so with those disclaimers out of the way, hi! I'm Misali, and PCUES is the single worst phonetic transcription system I've ever seen. PCUES, short for pronunciation cues, is a system that notates pronunciation of words while keeping their spellings the same. It does this by modifying letters within a word to indicate which of its multiple pronunciations a given letter represents. For example, the letter O by default represents short O, as in hot. It's written in bold to indicate when it's pronounced as long O, as in home, written smaller when it's reduced to schwa, as in connect, superscript when it's oo, as in do, gray when it's silent, as in the second O in chocolate, and so on. Every letter has some number of these different pronunciations that could be marked with PCUES, and while the exact details vary from letter to letter, the most common pronunciation variations are always the same. Specifically, bold always means long vowel, small always means reduced to schwa, and gray always means silent. Other letter-specific variations are generally indicated using the position of the letter itself, but in some cases the letter is made wider, and as a special case for the letter R, a rotated R is used for the sound Additionally, sometimes sequences of letters are underlined, with a solid underline used for combined sequences and a dotted line used for blended sequences. The distinction seems to be that combined sequences generally are multiple letters pronounced as a single phoneme, but in blended sequences the individual letters are still all pronounced. I don't think there's any sequence of letters where PCUES differentiates between two separate pronunciations by calling one of them combined and the other one blended, so I'm not quite sure why these are two different things, but it's probably fine. The way it's implemented allows you to click on any word within some text and see it transcribed using PCUES. Then if you click it again, you can hear a text-to-speech lady sounding out the word and then reading it in full.
If, n, t, n, at, sh, n, law, international.
Now, what you've almost certainly noticed about this is just the way that it looks. Of course, it's probably not fair to critique the system's aesthetic, because obviously when PCUES was designed, they clearly prioritized its functionality above the way it looks. You can tell they didn't prioritize the way it looks because of how bad its aesthetic is. Because of that, I won't spend any significant amount of time nitpicking how awkward the wide letters and rotated R look, or how in general everything just kind of looks like a ransom note, because it's clear that the aesthetic just isn't important to the design of PCUES. Anyway, earlier, if you recall, I said that you can make any letter bold to have it represent a long vowel. So, okay, what does that actually mean? As you know, historically, the English language had many pairs of vowels that were pronounced the same, but with one being longer than the other. However, the Great Vowel Shift drastically changed all of these vowels, breaking the link between long and short vowels. The result of this is that every vowel letter in English has multiple common pronunciations that sound completely different from each other, with some descending from Middle English short vowels and others descending from Middle English long vowels. When this is explained to children, long vowels are usually described as being pronounced as the vowels' names. While this isn't technically historically accurate, it's close enough to the truth to be a decent introduction to the concept for kids, and more importantly, it's useful for explaining how English spelling works. PCUES takes this idea, that sometimes vowels are pronounced as their names, at face value. This is, by itself, fine. However, PCUES takes this idea to its logical extreme. So you know that joke people like to make about the word Q, where they say it's just the letter Q and then 4 silent letters? You know that joke, right? It's a pretty decent joke and all, but we all know that that's not literally true, right? Like, you can't just add UE after whatever English letter and say, yeah, WUEUE could be pronounced like W, and that's completely consistent with English spelling. Like, no, the UE after the Q is doing stuff in this word. It's not literally 4 silent letters. PCUES is a system built around the idea that, yes, actually, Q literally is the letter Q and then 4 silent letters. Q is a long vowel in that word, just like the F in left, and the R in car, and the Z in zebra, and the X in exit, and the J in jail. So why exactly would you do this? Like, look at the word left for a second. Every single letter in this word is pronounced the way it normally is. You could, following the rules of PCUES, not change anything at all about this word's spelling and accurately provide the word's pronunciation. Surely it is more complicated to say that the E is silent and that the F is pronounced like F, right? Well, the fine people at Learning Stewards do have an explanation for this. Quote,
one of the difficult confusions for developing readers is a consequence of learning the ABCs and the ABC song. Because most children learn the ABCs before they begin to learn to read, their brains learn to associate a letter with its letter name sound. When later learning to read, their brains' response to seeing a letter is to hear its letter name. As it is often the case that letters don't sound like their letter names, this association confuses the process of learning to read.
Now, this is an interesting point. If kids naturally tend to associate letter forms with their names, why not lean into that and emphasize whenever a letter name appears in the pronunciation of a word? According to Learning Stewards, this allows the system to be more intuitive to young children. Again, I'm not an educator, so I'm in no position to say if this is actually true or not. However, as a linguist, I'm a little concerned with exactly what this is meant to be teaching. Like, looking back at the word left, by explaining its pronunciation in this way, where the E is silent and the F is F, what general pattern is a child supposed to learn from this explanation, and what assumptions will they make about the pronunciations of other words using that pattern? Like, if a kid were to see the word leapt, for instance, that kid could notice that this is just the word left, but with the F replaced with P, and since nothing else about the word is different, they might then make the assumption that this word must be pronounced like lepete. Of course, kids make wrong guesses about the pronunciations of words from their limited understanding of how spelling works all the time when they're learning to read. That's like how learning works. But in this case, the misinterpretation is the result of generalizing from a pattern that's really just an artifact of the way the pronunciation was explained. Now, could kids figure this out anyway? Yeah, of course. Kids are really good at figuring out language stuff, and the fact that PCUES represents pronunciations of words more explicitly than their plain spellings is by itself a useful teaching tool. But this one particular aspect could overcomplicate the mental model of English orthography kids need to develop as they're learning to read. They'll need to work out that F only tends to be pronounced like F when it comes after a silent E. And like, beyond being just incorrect, I'm not convinced that that's a useful way to think about English spelling. When I first encountered this system back in January, I went ahead and pointed this out in the comment section of the first page I read about it on Learning Stewards' website. Why yes, January was several months ago. In retrospect, I probably shouldn't have been so dismissive of the system, but I do still generally agree with what I said at the time. I specifically asked why exactly the word spelling is transcribed in a way that says that the E and second L are both silent, and that the first L on its own is what's pronounced like L, even though it would have been both simpler and and more accurate to say that the E is pronounced like short E and the L is pronounced like L. This doesn't make any sense, so why does this system work in this way? I did, in fact, get a response to this from someone at the organization who posted under the pseudonym Learning Activist. I am now going to show you their response in full.
Thanks, John. We appreciate your engagement. First, we welcome dialogue as to how the visual cues we use could best support learning to disambiguate, decode. Your question about spelling reveals a bias in thinking caused by your static conception of the orthography. If rather than using this real-time responsive learning support system to augment the way we have historically thought about reading instruction, we reimagine reading instruction in terms of what this kind of technology and approach makes possible, the question answers itself. The bottleneck to progress and the cause of great difficulty during the process of learning to read in English is the artificially complexly confusing relationships between letters and sounds. Most kids learn letters in ways that prime their brains to reflexively respond to the sight of a letter with its name. When learning the alphabet letters, there is no such thing as silent letters. Given the learned biases in play at the time children are learning to read, helping them know when a letter is silent, not heard, or sounds like its letter name, significantly reduces their confusion, without requiring them to remember to apply unnaturally abstract interpretation rules. Do you hear the E in spelling? Do you hear the second L in spelling? No. You think you need to spell those sounds that way. If you get what I'm talking about, and from a fresh place want to dialogue with us about how to improve how we represent the letter sound patterns and use them to conduct the kind of on-demand learning we are advocating, I'd welcome the opportunity.
This response is the main reason I'm still thinking about PCUES all these months later. To the best of my understanding, what Learning Activist here is saying is that, yes, actually, the L in the word spelling is pronounced like L, a fact which is so obvious and intuitive that it doesn't need to be justified at all. This particular aspect of PCUES is, in my linguistic opinion, the most obvious flaw with the system, and it's also the part that would be easiest to change. That said, this decision has an actual justification, and learning stewards claim that they have done the field research to determine that this actually is more intuitive for children. I have no reason to assume they'd be lying about that, so while I definitely don't like it, this is not, in fact, my biggest problem with PCUES as a system. No, the most significant design flaw with PCUES is that it's not robust enough to be able to transcribe the pronunciations of a very significant number of English words. This is, to some degree, unavoidable in a system that aims to show pronunciation without respelling, the way PCUES does. Some words really are spelled so irregularly that a system like this that accounts for them would need to have edge case rules that only apply to a single word. Like the GH in the old-timey spelling of hiccup is literally the only English word where GH is pronounced that way. Introducing a whole rule in a phonetic transcription system just for one word would probably be wasteful. But it's one thing to not be able to accurately transcribe words like hiccup.
But what about more common words, like, say, women? Here we can see that the O is small to indicate that it's reduced to schwa. The E is grayed out, so it's silent. The N is bold, so it's pronounced as its name. And everything else is pronounced the way it normally is. So this word is pronounced like women. And, it's not completely wrong.
It works as, a helpful nudge in the direction of the actual pronunciation. It's just not, in fact, how the word is pronounced. Here's how the text-to-speech lady reads it when you click it a second time.
What? N. Women.
When the voice is sounding it out one letter at a time, you can hear the pronunciation that the cues are indicating, and then after that you can hear the real pronunciation.
This system has no way of indicating that the O here actually makes an I sound, so it approximates.
There are countless examples of words like this, words that are spelled in ways that are so irregular that PCUES doesn't have any way of showing their pronunciations at all. But what's strange is that it doesn't just not work for these words. There are some words where PCUES just doesn't do anything at all. You click on the word and the transcription shown is completely unmodified, so you can assume that words like apeirogon and dozenalist and fanshaw and fahuquagods must just not be in its dictionary. You can still hear the text-to-speech voice reading out these words one letter at a time, but it's so plainly different from the real pronunciation that you can figure out on your own that this is just what PCUES does for a word it doesn't know how to pronounce. But for common words with irregular spellings, PCUES does show a pronunciation. It's just that the pronunciation it shows is different from how the word is pronounced. It's not kernel, it's cunnel. It's not pizza, it's pizza. It's not fjord, it's ford. It's not jalapeno, it's alapino. It's not bachi, it's bash. And while you might be able to excuse any of those words as being fine since they really are exceptionally irregular, there's also plenty of examples of words with tamer spellings that are still not annotated by PCUES correctly. It gives foo for few, beige for beige, anxious for anxious, pressure for pressure, machine for machine. It fails to differentiate between confusion and confusion, or between the rhymes of finger and singer. And that's not to even mention how PCUES completely ignores the fact that sometimes a word can be pronounced in different ways. You know, I say tomato, no reason to bother checking if anyone else says it a different way. Theoretically, it could be modified for use with dialects of English other than the one it was designed for, but as it exists now, it's clearly meant for use in a specific part of the United States and nowhere else. And also, words having more than one pronunciation isn't just something that matters across different dialects. Remember the way this is implemented. It doesn't transcribe whole text at a time, just individual words, completely void of context. It has no way of knowing if USE is supposed to be the verb use or the noun use, so it just guesses that it's the verb and shows that pronunciation. Same with live and live, read and read, content and content. Does any of this really matter? No, obviously not. This obscure phonetic transcription system giving a bunch of slightly wrong pronunciations for some somewhat tricky words is not a big deal. But I don't think the amount it matters is none. Imagine that you're actually using the system. You're still a child, old enough to be using a computer by yourself, but young enough that you'd find a system where you can click on words to be shown how to sound them out to be useful. You encounter a word and you can't figure out how to say it, so you click on it. Now, what is more likely? That a word you can't figure out how to pronounce on your own is one that's spelled in a way where PCUES is able to accurately represent its pronunciation, or that it's one that PCUES itself also has a hard time figuring out. Even if this system is useful for demonstrating the pronunciation of the majority of English words, those rare exceptions, the words where the pronunciation and spelling seem to be completely disconnected from each other, those are the words people need the most help learning how to pronounce. But okay, the system isn't supposed to just be used by kids who are casually browsing the internet unsupervised. Or at least I hope it's not supposed to be used by kids who are casually browsing the internet unsupervised. PCUES is part of a whole network of teaching tools, and its use in a classroom setting would, I assume, be restricted to words where it's adequate for explaining pronunciation, and any exceptions that are encountered could then be explained by an actual teacher. Picture a little kid in a classroom named Stephen, or Cheryl, or Charlotte, or Jacqueline, or Raphael, or Javier, or Antoinette, or Sonia. This child, for whatever reason, inputs their own name into this system, and PCUES, not robust enough to work for words that are spelled too irregularly, does not know how to pronounce their name. It works fine for the kid's classmates. Sophia, Jackson, Isabella, Aiden, Riley, Michael. Their names all work just fine, but for some reason, this little kid is sounding out their name one letter at a time along with the computer, and when they put the sounds together, it just doesn't sound like how they pronounce their name. PCUES says to the kid, you're Stephen, you're Cheryl, you're Charlotte, you're Jacqueline, you're Raphael, you're Javier, you're Antoinette, you're Sonja. And I don't know, I just feel bad for this hypothetical child. Like, what lesson would they have learned from this? Ideally, it's that the computer is wrong sometimes, but more realistically, they would learn that since the computer is telling them their name is pronounced in a way that's different from how they're saying it, that must mean that they've been saying their own name incorrectly. Fortunately, this is avoidable. Unambiguously showing pronunciation without needing to respell words within English text is not an unsolvable problem. It's hard, but it's not unsolvable. In fact, one of my personal favorite phonetic transcription systems does just that. It's called Annotated English, and it was published in 2010 by Jose Hernandez Arroyo. I won't fully describe how it works here, but you can read the documentation for yourself. In Jose's system, the multitude of different pronunciations of individual letters are disambiguated using diacritical marks, as well as a number of context-dependent rules for determining the most likely default pronunciation of a given letter. Annotated English is very complex, and it kinda has to be in order to be able to handle any English word. Of course, Annotated English and PCUES have completely different goals and target audiences. Annotated English is intended to be used by adults who already have a baseline understanding of how English spelling generally works. In fact, it seems like the sorts of words Annotated English is optimized for are the same sorts of words that PCUES seemingly neglects. It's almost certainly too complicated to be useful for teaching children, but its existence clearly demonstrates that, yes, it is possible to have a system that can unambiguously show both spelling and pronunciation simultaneously without any loss of information. The only downside is that it essentially needs to be as complex as English orthography itself in order to work. But there is yet another way this could be done. Granted, it would require abandoning the idea that PCUES is meant to show pronunciation without respelling anything, but it could still work for showing how a word can be sounded out one segment at a time. In the Japanese language, the majority of written characters can be pronounced in a wide variety of different ways depending on context. Compared to English's 26 letters, Japanese has over 2,000 kanji to learn the intricacies of. While Japanese is not unique in terms of the pure number of characters included in the written language, the amount of variation in how these characters are used makes learning to read Japanese notoriously difficult. One thing that makes it a little bit easier for people in Japan to learn how to read is furigana. Using furigana, words are written out with their hard-to-predict kanji spellings,
with a phonetic spelling written in small characters above it. Similar systems, called Ruby characters collectively, exist for other East Asian languages that are written using a logography. Furigana can be seen all the time in Japanese media intended for children, which can really help kids learn how to read Japanese text. And I'm not saying this is the only reason why, but Wikipedia does confidently claim that the literacy rate in Japan is 99.9%. So that's my solution. When a word is pronounced in a way that's too different from its spelling for the pronunciation without respelling approach to work, just respell it phonetically in smaller text above the word. And it wouldn't have to be the whole word, this could work with individual letters within a word too. Like to indicate that the GH in hiccup is unusually pronounced like P, just put a little P above it. Now, one encouraging thing to note is that during the time I've spent making this video, there are some flaws with PQs that I had noticed that have since been fixed. Notably, a special case was added for the word one, which was sorely needed. This change is great, and shows that learning stewards are working to actively improve this system. I look forward to seeing which other things I wrote about PQs stop being true in the near future. And that's PQs. I recommend that everyone go check it out for themselves. Play around with it, see if you can find any more fun edge cases where it doesn't really work. Oh, and if you're someone from Learning Stewards and you're watching this, thanks for watching all the way to the end. Sorry if I was a little too mean about parts of this thing in here, but hopefully you can take some of my constructive criticisms and make PQs a more functional system. Also, huge thanks to Alicia from Transparency for reading those quotes for this video. I think she did a great job. Transparency is an extremely underrated video essay channel, which I think needs to be corrected. What other stuff? Right, so in my last real video, I had a poll asking people which of my in-progress videos to finish first, and as you can tell from how this video is done now, this is the video that won that poll. Thanks to everyone who participated. I got over 2 million responses, which is very impressive considering that only 100,000 people saw the video the poll was linked from. My next video is going to be another one of those options from that poll, so stay tuned for that. Anyway, that's it. That's the video.